The ELEMNT Bolt V2 is simply put Wahoo's best cycling GPS to date. It improves over the ultra-popular first generation in most ways, and it even makes the ELEMNT Roam look like a pretty mediocre way to spend your money. After months of testing, I can say it's a pretty damn good device, but there's still plenty of ways that it could and probably should have been better. So let's dig in with what's good about the Bolt V2.
I've always quite liked Wahoo's function over form approach to making their hardware, and the Bolt V2 improves over the V1 in a few really nice little ways. The buttons are now convex and much easier to press. The charge port is now USB-C, which I'm always a fan of. There's 64 colors in the Bolt V2, which makes maps easier to read and color code some of the data fields to reflect effort if you want to set it up that way. The unit has generally been smoothed out and made sleeker than the V1, and there's a tweaked out front mount as well. And there's also a few invisible changes like a CPU and storage capacity bump. The screen is still admittedly quite small, but I've always found it quite easy to read because of that almost e-ink style that Wahoo has gone with. There's also those handy little LED indicators that run along the forehead of the unit that help you out in various ways that you can set. Overall, it's a well-rounded hardware package, but it certainly isn't going to win any awards for beauty. Undoubtedly, the Bolt V2 is a nice unit to ride with. The screen is sharp, easy to read, and it doesn't seem too affected by direct sunlight, and there's not too much glare that creeps in during the day. The buttons are now much easier to press because of that new shaping to them, which makes operating the unit nicer. The tones are fairly subtle and not too annoying either. Although I still do end up turning them off eventually. The menus are quite simple and easy to navigate while in motion as well, so if you need to do something like end a route, it's pretty straightforward. You never need more than a couple of button presses to do what you need to. For the ride experience, the V2 takes what was already good about the V1 and just makes it slightly better in a few ways. On balance, the maps, routes, and navigation experience of Wahoo is my favorite across all of the GPS manufacturers that I've used. It's not perfect, but it seems to just have the fewest points of friction on the market. You can download any maps that you need through the phone app, which is great, and once they're on the device, they are generally quite easy to read and have a good amount of detail. You can sync with Strava, Ride with GPS, and Komoot, so all of the routes that you make with those platforms will be available through the ELEMNT Phone app. I love being able to create a route in Strava, save, sync, and download it to the device through the phone app, all in a very easy and quick process. Nothing else is that seamless in my experience. Out in the world, the navigation is slick, with the chevrons always very easy to read, and they also just subtly indicate the way in which you need to go. So you're not just trying to follow a line, and if it gets complicated, figure out exactly which way you need to turn next. You get audio and visual cues as you are approaching an upcoming turn, and they've designed it so they don't cover your data field, which is quite nice. So if you're on a data page, the turn cue will sort of bump everything up and sit at the bottom. You never lose any of the detail that you're looking at. Even the LEDs along the top will indicate which way you need to turn. Navigation is generally the most reliable in my experience as well. It'll tend to get you back onto the course with the least amount of trouble. I find it more reliable and far less annoying than the Garmin system, but it still has its moments where it'll try and lead you up someone's driveway and take you through a bunch of little trails that really don't exist for riding. Apart from that, Wahoo has really given a good all-round platform for maps and navigation. The ELEMNT Phone app has gradually evolved over the years to be an intuitive, stable, and a quite easy way to control the Bolt V2. I really love being able to use phone apps to control my GPSs because they fundamentally overcome the clunky and bad user interfaces that have sort of been baked into GPSs ever since way back in the beginning when we first started using them. Most of the features are changeable through the phone app, and you can use it to set up all of your pages and data fields. I've gotten pretty sick of Wahoo's list system for setting up your data fields though. I've used plenty of other better apps from Brighton, for example, and they show you what the actual screens will look like. Wahoo's system of just showing you a list can be a bit annoying because you might not actually like the end result, but you're not going to be able to see it until you've actually looked at it on your device. There is some room for improvement, but generally the ELEMNT app is a strength of the Wahoo ecosystem. A quick note on trainer connectivity, the Bolt V2, as you'd expect, works really well with Wahoo's own smart trainers. I like to use a head unit as sort of an extra data dashboard when I'm using Zwift. I've also run a couple of the workouts that are selectable through the Wahoo system, and then the trainer will set your resistance and the head unit will lead you through all of those cues. If you already own a Wahoo trainer, then the Bolt will work very well with it.
There certainly is a lot to like about the ELEMNT Bolt V2, but let's pause that positivity for now because there's a few ways in which I think this could have been better.
You can make a very reasonable argument that Wahoo could have done better with the 4 years that they've had between the first and second generation. Wahoo is quite conservative with how they iterate their products, so I'm not surprised to see the upgrades that we did get. But there's really just not much in here that you would point to and say, that's a cool new feature, that's great innovation. It's all just kind of unsurprising and safe. I do really appreciate the quality of life upgrades that we got, but there's not really anything that got me excited in this unit. Now the Bolt V2's battery life isn't bad. I did a couple of days of riding in the last week with 9 hours of moving and probably a couple of hours of idle time in there, and it used 60% of the battery with full navigation running when I was in motion. So the claimed 15 hours of battery life is pretty much about right. The problem is that so much of the competition will outperform that, from the Edge 530 to the Brighton Rider 450 and 750, the Lezyne Mega XL. And a lot of devices that are cheaper will also have better battery life. And 15 hours is still more than sufficient for how most people are going to ride their bike, but it is just a little way in which I think Wahoo could do better within the market. Wahoo has generally been quite good with the Strava Live segment integration. Once you've triggered the start of a segment, you'll get a set of data fields that you can adjust, and it'll measure your effort against your records, in a way that you would expect and in a way that is quite good. Where it's really lacking is segment management. You can only have all of your segments on or all of them off. If you have a bunch of overlapping segments or you ride through an area where you have quite a lot of segments, then the unit is just constantly beeping and freaking out, and it's really annoying. The Garmin system lets you individually turn segments on and off, so you can only have those on that you are actually interested in targeting. Because the Wahoo doesn't, I mostly just end up turning off the live segments and just riding to power or ignoring those efforts completely. Let me turn off individual segments, Wahoo. I don't want to have to unstar them in Strava. You still don't get bike profiles in the Wahoo ecosystem, and you do in so many of the others, from Garmin to Hammerhead to Brighton and Lezyne. It's a good user experience to have bike profiles that contain the data pages particular to that bike. Instead, you have to manually set up different pages for different bikes and then use the phone app or the head unit to turn them on and off depending on what you're riding on that day. I have 4 bikes and I like to have all of them with their own profile on the platforms that allow me to do so. So having to do pages on and off every time I change bikes or ride a different one is just a pain in the butt. It's just the way in which Wahoo is inexplicably lagging behind a lot of the rest of the market. Wahoo is still inexplicably sending you stem mounts that use a cable tying system. The last Garmin that I had to cable tie to a stem was the 705 from back in 2008. Now, I actually quite like stem mounts for when I'm riding gravel because typically I'll run a bar bag and an out front mount gets in the way of access to the bag. But I don't use the stem mount because I know that I'll have to use cable ties that look bad and will eventually just be plastic sitting in landfill. Wahoo, you just need to do better. This is not good enough. Repeating what I said at the top of the video, I think the Bolt V2 is the best GPS that Wahoo has made. And if you're wanting to buy a Wahoo right now, this is the one. I really do like the overall experience of using this device. From the ride experience to the maps and navigation, I even quite like the hardware. The smartphone setup is nice. It's not perfect and I do see plenty of tweaks that could improve the ecosystem, but there's no denying that this is a good unit to own and a good unit to use. And that is really where I'm going to leave it for this review. Thank you so much for watching. I have plenty of other GPS content coming up and planned for this channel, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for watching as always, and don't forget to ride safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.